Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello students, we will continue our presentation with our discussion on places to live, that is about houses, standalone houses which were designed by famous architects of the 20th and 21st century. And as I told you in the beginning of the first part last time, that these houses play a very important role because their many ideas of the architects, their fundamental concepts that they had with regard to design were studied or implemented in houses first, and then they took them to larger buildings or larger building projects or different building typologies. Also because houses are functionally not that heavy, they have very limited number of functional requirement or functional data needed. Therefore, to conceptually study design ideas in houses was much easier, and therefore many houses of different architects became as prototypes which were then used for bigger projects. So simply taking the example of Corbusier's 5 points of a new architecture, through which he evolved a series of houses like Villa Stein, the Villa Edgarsche, etc., culminating in the Villa Savoy, and then he brought the 5 points of a new architecture into other building typologies like the Mill Owners Association building in Ahmedabad or the Carpenter Center in Harvard, or even in the design of the buildings of Capital Complex in Chandigarh. So these core principles that he had developed in the houses, he brought them forward to much larger building types later. The same is true for many other architects, and we see how they progressed in their ideas by designing houses. We will again start with a house by Pierre Koenig. We had seen last time, or rather we had ended last time by seeing the case study house number 21 by Pierre Koenig, and now we will look at the case study house number 22, which is usually known as the Stahl house. It is an iconic modern design and it showcases the panoramic view of the Los Angeles city. It's perched on a hillock, and from here, literally cantilevering out of the hill, you get this fantastic view of the city. Thus, in this house we find the cantilevers of Frank Lloyd Wright, we find the open glazed glass facades of Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier, of course along with that of F.L. Wright, and amazingly the core design concepts of F.L. Wright were first taken to Europe, where he exhibited them for the first time in 1914 through the Azimuth portfolio. I have talked about it earlier, and then from Europe these ideas got evolved and they were brought back to the United States. So this entire journey of Frank Lloyd's ideas of free-flowing interiors and the interaction between the inside and outside were evolved and brought back, and here we find it in this house in the United States. It is made of steel and glass, industrial materials that were generally uncommon to be used in residential design at that time. It's an L-shaped design, as you can see here, and there are separate public areas and private areas in the house, and there are 20-foot wide glass panes that have been used to give this amazing panoramic view of the city. You can look through the glass and be able to see the view. The interior is open plan interiors with built-in furnishing, something that Wright promoted, radiant floor heating and solar heated pool that is between the two wings of the house. This is where the pool is, between the two wings of the house, and the natural landscaping with rocks and plants blends with all the surrounding natural environment, and there is a seamless indoor and outdoor flow of spaces. Thus, free-flowing interiors, panoramic views are the unique selling points of this very iconic project. So far that Norman Foster went and said that the night view of Pierre Koenig's case study house number 22 captures the spirit of late 20th century architecture. It's an elegant, light, economical, transparent enclosure whose simplicity hides the rigorous process that has made it possible. He goes on to say that if I had to choose one architectural moment of which I would like to have been the author, this is surely it, the Stahl House. He also says the case study house is a touchstone for contemporary architects, and Pierre Koenig's career one of constancy and truth to principles. Foster says that Pierre Koenig, like his architecture, is inspirational, still inquiring, exploring, inventing, and never ready to rest on his laurels. So, though we may not have talked much about Pierre Koenig in the pantheon of 20th century architects, but his role, his position in that group is assured because of these contributions that he made through these houses. This is the view that you get, the expansive view of the city lying underneath and the city at night, the view through the glass. The other important interesting glass house was that of Philip Johnson in 1949, which is very likely said to be an imitation of the Farnsworth house. But the question remains that how could it be an imitation, because the Farnsworth house was ultimately built after the glass house of Philip Johnson, but apparently the core ideas were already being crystallized in the designs of the Farnsworth house, and Philip Johnson was able to learn from that. So it was inspired by the Farnsworth house. This is the picture of the Farnsworth house, and all the rest are that of the glass house itself. The perfect proportions and simplicity that we find in the Farnsworth house also gets replicated in the Philip Johnson's glass house, and thus it's a brilliant piece of modern architecture. Johnson built this house on a 47-acre estate in Connecticut, and the house was first of 14 such buildings that he built on this property over half a century. This is a one-story house like the Farnsworth house, 32 by 56 feet, open floor plan enclosed with 18 feet floor-to-ceiling sheets of glass between black steel columns and H-beams that are anchored in the glass. It creates a series of reflections of the surrounding trees that you see on the glass itself, and the interior is completely exposed to the outdoors except for this cylindrical piece that you find here, which encases the bathroom, which is floor to ceiling height 10.5 feet, and then the cylinder, which is made of brick, protrudes from the top of the house also. The other fixed part in the house is the fireplace. So in that sense, there is a more transparency in the house from one end to the other, because in the Farnsworth house in the middle, Mies van der Rohe had placed this rectangular wooden unit which included the kitchenette within it, included the services, included the bathroom, whereas such a unit is not here in the house, and the only two places which are fixed are this cylinder and the fireplace. So there seems to be more openness from one end to the other, the through and through feeling of the glass. That kind of transparency is more evident here in the glass house. So it's a single open room. The divisions besides the bathroom can be discreetly done through low cabinets and bookshelves, as is shown in these pictures how those divisions have been done. The ventilation in this house is from all four sides and it flows through the house, and there is also ample natural lighting available. So if we compare both of them, they seem so similar that some pictures might actually, you can get a little deceived which house we are looking at, whether it is the Farnsworth house or the glass house. But there are some indicators, like there is this herringbone red brick flooring in the case of the glass house, and there is this marble stone flooring in the case of Farnsworth house. As usual, Mies van der Rohe went in for very rich stone materials in his houses or in his buildings. Again, the one stark comparison is the black and white comparison. The glass house is black, the Farnsworth house is white. So, in an exhibition held in New York in 2005, this called the side-by-side exhibition, showed similar, the glass house and Farnsworth are similar but have different attitudes. The Farnsworth house, when you look at it, appears abstract and has a universal idea. It is an idea that has been used all over the world. I have talked about it in other projects, how this idea of the universal space was used by the high-tech architects. So this idea of not only being a universal built form but a universal space also counted within it. This glass box could stand anywhere. It's pure form, structure and minimalism. Philip Johnson's glass house can also be called some of these, but the more important thing is that it is more personal. There is more warmth about the house, for example in the way the flooring has been done, or some of the other features of the furniture that have been used within the house. It is designed for his taste. So there is a context to the glass house and to his art and lifestyle. It's also more connected to the site and his way of living. Thus, Philip Johnson's glass house becomes more contextual to the site where it's located rather than being a universal symbol like the Farnsworth house. But these are very few minor conceptual points. Both of them stand as iconic examples of glass boxes in the 20th century, and many followed. Later in the 20th century, we see, for example, Mayer's first publicized house, a wood construction with individual steel supports, brickwork for chimney. I have already talked about this publicized house. This has got the white aesthetic in it. And the public and private spaces, I have talked about this house earlier, so I will just rush through it in a summary. The public spaces of the house are not at the entry of the house but at the rear of the house, so to speak. You enter the house from this point. For some it might be the rear of the house, but actually this is the front of the house. The rear of the house is that which is facing the sea, which is completely in glass, whereas the actual entrance to the house is an opaque facade with few punctured fenestrations. So the public spaces are towards the sea where the family meets and entertains, and it is overlooking the water. The house consists of 3 levels enclosed within the 3-sided glass enclosure. On this side, the private side, which is on the rear, is organized through levels behind this opaque facade, and here we have the private spaces of the house. So the entrance of the house is facing the land, the woods and the road. The rear of the house where the public spaces are is facing the sea. So when we look at the interiors of the house and try to compare it with the early modernist houses, I told you that Smith House is an example of late modernism. They carried on the idea of modernism and made it even more dynamic, so that is apparent in these spaces. It's more radical and dynamic than the early white aesthetic houses like the Villa Savoy, like the Tugendhat house. Smith House is layered, it's sort of visually active interior. Meyer transformed the white aesthetic of the earlier modernist architects from a formal shell into a spatially radical, richer experience. Thus, in this house also, we see the decomposition of the box. The box is taken and decomposed like it happened in the Schrader house, not so much in the Villa Stein, but definitely there in the Smith house. Now the next house that we look at is the Winstein house by Richard Meyer, which was even a more visually dynamic composition of interlocking forms, grids, terraces and voids, and Meyer continues to break the geometry, create these layered volumes, and they shift and slide over one another. It is more elaborate and more radical plan, 11 bedroom house as compared to the Smith house. Another example that I had discussed with you in slight more detail was the Miller house, house 3 by Peter Eisenman. Early aesthetics or the aesthetics of early modernism was monochromatic white planar geometry with very clean geometric forms. So like Corbusier or even the D-style architects like G.T. Ritweld. But here in the group called the Whites, of which Peter Eisenman was also a key figure, they reinterpreted modernism through abstract form, pure geometry and a neutral white palette. And hence in this house there is radical decomposition of form. This is the process of how the cube was taken and decomposed to this much. This was so radically decomposed. Now we have also seen in two different places the conversation about ornament in architecture. At one point I talked to you about Adolf Loos writing ornament in crime and saying ornamentation is wasted manpower, wasted material, wasted capital. Modern man does not need ornamentation. The second one was when I talked to you about Robert Venturi and postmodernism, and we looked at his writing called Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture, where he says architects can try to ignore ornamental and decorative elements in buildings or even try to abolish them, but they will not go away or will not go away for a long time because architects do not have the power to replace them. Two diametrically opposite viewpoints with regard to ornamentation. We had seen these points in two different places. I have now brought them together to show you the contrast between these two opinions. So we come to the Vana Venturi house by Robert Venturi, where there is this symmetry versus asymmetry. The whole house leans towards symmetry and then creates asymmetry within its form. But as compared to a late modern house like the Gautam residence in USA by Charles Gautam, Robert Venturi's house is simple as compared to the spatial play taking place in late modernism. The plan is based on a symbolic concept rather than being a spatially abstract composition as you see here. So when we compare late modernism with postmodernism, you can for example compare the Vana Venturi house with the Smith house, and you can see even the indoor spaces how different they are visually and how different the plans are. We had also seen this close Indian replication to the idea of the Vana Venturi house, and I had shown you a couple of more examples, but I will just focus on one for the time being. That was the Chakrabarti residence in New Delhi by Romi Khosla in 1975, where he made a house which had an exaggerated chimney in the colonial style architecture, very playful. Just as you would find in postmodernism, you find it in the Vana Venturi house. So this chimney itself is so tall that it can literally occupy the entire height of the entrance door of the Chakrabarti residence. Then if we compare postmodernism with late modernism, we can again compare for example the Villa Rotunda by Charles Moore in 1980 to the house in Palm Beach in USA by Richard Meyer. Two architects who were very staunch proponents of their style of architecture, postmodern versus late modern. So here we have symbolic versus rational, gable roof that you find here versus the modernist flat roof, square or round windows that you find here versus the transparent glazed facade that you find in the house in Palm Beach. So the postmodern plan has some link with the modernist free plan. There is no doubt about it. When you look at the Vana Venturi house, you do see this free flowing space in the living room area, etc. But so there is the same rational approach with added angles in it. So for example, when he provides these angles and turns, you would not find such kind of things happening usually in a late modern house. It will be rigid orthogonal geometry. Late modern plans have also evolved with time. To show you a dramatic example, in 1997 we have Shigeru Ban's wall-less house. We will look at it in a little more detail, where literally the floor becomes completely one and all the parts of the house including the washrooms and the other spaces can open up to make one single universal space, but they can be then divided through partitions. So the early late modern ideas became even more radical as time passed by. Now modernism is alive and well in the 21st century. This is one aspect that I would now like to come to, as I want to talk to you about what is called as neo-modernism. There are iconic houses with innovative concepts like this house in Leiria in Portugal by Aires Matias. Now there were two main developments. One was the exploration of the postmodern architecture, and the second was re-research and development of modernist architecture, re-researching the principles of modernism. Basically they developed in parallel, but the second road that was taken was neo-modernism, or the new modernist design, new modern design you can call it, which was taking forward modernism in the 21st century, but certain basic changes happening. So, if we now consider neo-modernism, neo-modernism is a reaction against the complexity of postmodernism and neo-eclecticism, the rise of the mixed styles that was there, the eclectic styles that had come in the 19th century industrial revolution. Many basic characteristics of 20th century modernism are found in neo-modernism. It rejects ornamentation and attempts to imitate the past just as the modernists did. There is functionality, there is a sober aesthetic, monolithic volumes, greater simplicity. So it continues modernism as the dominant architectural form which was there in the 20th century, now leading into the 21st century. Especially we find it in corporate offices. The new stage of modernism, with addition of factors like energy efficiency, green building, sustainability, new materials and new technology, is added to modernism, and that is now being called as neo or termed as neo-modernism. So if Kaufmann House is an example of modernism in 1947, the house as in Monasterios in Spain is an example of neo-modernism. There are cuboidal volumes in straight lines, but they can also be abstractions, they can be in RCC, glass and steel and other ecologically friendly materials, both monochrome as well as vibrant colors as you see here, and experiment with shapes. For example, the de Blas house is an example of neo-modernism, and in this house, for example, you will find a mixture of modernist inspirations. The de Blas house in Spain by Alberto Campobeza. There is transparent glass and steel box mounted over a solid opaque concrete box that you see here. So the de Blas house, the upper part of glass and steel, actually looks so similar to the Farnsworth house by Mies van der Rohe. Continuity of modernism into neo-modernism. And when you look at the plan itself, you are again reminded of the Farnsworth house. Of course, the Farnsworth house had a platform next to it, but if you look at the Farnsworth house itself, just the upper glass box of the de Blas house in its plan feels so similar to that of the Farnsworth house. The de Blas house also seems inspired or similar in architectural concept to the New National Gallery. The New National Gallery was also a glass and steel box mounted over a concrete opaque box, a more opaque box, and we find the same concept in the de Blas house. And then again in the de Blas house, when you compare the plans, this is the upper plan of the glass and steel box, and this is the solid opaque box underneath where the most of the rooms are. The main functional rooms are in the solid opaque box, just as the main exhibition gallery in New National Gallery is in that opaque box below ground, not in the steel and glass box above. These are the interiors of the opaque box, the living spaces, the bedroom areas, etc. And there is a side door that leads out that you see here. And so these are the pictures of the glass and steel part of the de Blas house. Another comparison, just I am digressing a bit to draw comparisons. For example, when we look at Tadao Ando's Pulitzer Arts Foundation in the US 2001 and compare it with the New National Gallery by Mies van der Rohe, you see the masses seem so similar to each other, and both of them are over a solid concrete base. Here also you find in Pulitzer Arts Foundation and you find it in New National Gallery. The difference being that the upper block in Pulitzer Arts Foundation, Tadao Ando used RCC and glass, Mies used steel and glass. So Pulitzer Arts Foundation is an amalgamation actually of Corbusian and Miesian ideology put together in this one building. In the de Blas house, what we find here is the similarities over the various projects of Alberto Campobeza. So when you see, for example, the Rufo house, and so you compare it with the de Blas house, you find a lot of similarity. There also is trying to create a more transparent light glass box with a more heavy opaque box underneath. Or we find other houses of Campo Beza that there is a signature architectural language or style of Beza. So if you are familiar in detail about his couple of his houses, you can look at other projects of Beza and generally be able to give an accurate prediction of the architect of that project, because the signature architectural language or style is evident in his work. Are there other architects also? There are. For example, we see the works of Mies van der Rohe. Such a very strong signature he has over his projects, and that of minimalism. Evident, this signature architectural language is evident in the works of nearly all iconic architects to a lesser or a greater degree. It's their signature on their building. Or obviously Frank Gehry and deconstructivism, this signature architectural language across his projects, or for that matter the works of Tadao Ando, brutalism in fine finished concrete with these signature holes that you find here, in which the supports had been embedded, taken out, the holes are left behind, and you find it consistently in his projects. Or in the works of Calatrava. Their sculptural expressionism in steel, the skeletal and fantastic forms, he has a signature architectural language across his projects. We can go on to see, for example, the works of Zaha Hadid, futuristic forms. We find all her projects having that kind of signature across them. We also find a signature architectural language in the works of Julie Snow, a Canadian based firm called Snow Acrylic, and they make their projects under the neo-modernism concept or style, and this is refined modernism with very clean and simple forms, precise details which respond to the site, the climate and the people. These are some of the projects of the firm and of Julie Snow, but we focused on the Kohler House in Canada by Julie Snow in 2000. It's cantilevered off a cliff here. It appears lightweight, but it's structurally strong, is able to face some very high winds. But when you look at the house, you are reminded again visually of some other houses. I am reminded immediately when I look at this, I am reminded of the Farnsworth house in the way the whole structure has been put together, the glass and steel members. And the way it is cantilevering off the cliff, I am reminded of the cantilevers of Frank Lloyd Wright. Thus the minimalism of Mies along with the cantilever of Wright. So neo-modernism continues to show itself in series of inspirations from modernism and modernist architects. It changes from single story of Farnsworth to two stories here, layered over one another to maximize the interior space while preserving the light. So when you look at this space, in fact, though I don't have a visual, but it reminds me of the interiors of the houses of Richard Meyer, particularly the Smith house. So this double height facade, this double height space, a double height space enclosed with glass, is free interiors, is evident in many architects' works. It is there in Richard Meyer, beginning from earlier from Le Corbusier, Julie Snow, Pierre Charouz's Maison du Verre, Charles André Ames' own house, again in the works of Richard Meyer, Tadao Ando, and again Richard Meyer. So many Richard Meyers, but other architects also. Then coming to the Berman House in Australia by Harry Sidler in 1999, another example of neo-modernism, late 20th century return to the simplicity, purity of early modernism while blending in contextual and technological adaptations through modernist hybrids of today. Modernist cuboid of glass and steel, but it has a broken curved roof. This roof that you see here, roof also functions as a rain collector necessary for this remote region, and thus this technology was added to this house. The strength of modernism also is in occupying rugged locations. So we find that in the Smith house, and we find that in the Berman house, we find that in the De Blas house, in the Falling Water, and in the house, I believe this is Julie Snow's. So we find this juxtapositioning of modernism with the landscape. Now in neo-modernism, like I said, heavy inspirations from modernism. In the Berman house, again visually, and I may be wrong, You can yourself examine the slides and look at it. This glass facade running along completely around the building, and you find similarity with the Tugendhat house glass facade. When you look at the interior with the fireplace kept here and the living room in this side, and there is another space behind it, I am reminded of the Roorkee house, which also had a similar concept, living space and the dining space divided by the fireplace. So I find that the Burman house seems to be a combination of Tugendhat house and the Roorkee house. The ideas being carried forward from modernism into neo-modernism. Not only that, obviously you would have thought, if there is a cantilever over a cliff, I would remind you of falling water. I would even remind you that this is like the Kohler house by Julie Snow, cantilevered over the rocky terrain. These cantilevers of right and falling water repeatedly appear in these modern houses of the 21st century. I have not labeled them, forgive me for that. You can look them up. All these houses, this is falling water, all these houses are examples of these cantilevers. Neo-modern plans and how they compare with the modern plans. These are examples of neo-modern plans, and like I said, neo-modern is modern plus technology, plus new materials, plus some more radical changes in the way the plan is put together. Say for example, you look at this plan, this is more like an L-shaped plan, or even this plan, and somehow I am reminded of the Ozonian houses, I am reminded of the Stahl house. Then we come to another important project called the Villa del Ava in Paris by Rem Koolhaas, 1991, on a steeply sloping plot, separate living spaces for the parents and the daughter. The solution is 2 pavilions that are linked by a pool at the roof level. The concept of Corbusier having a roof garden, in this case a pool with pilotis, which is pilotis like a forest of columns that are not straight like a normal pilotis, but they are at random angles. That is the pilotis here, and the overall cubical geometry, and I will show you some more similarities like this one. When you look at the facade from the other end of the house, compare it with Villa Savoy, you find that it is like an interpretation of Villa Savoy in a different material. And in fact both houses are in Paris. So here we have free flowing interiors, but it is a much more complex arrangement of spaces. Instead of free flowing interiors in Koolhaas's house, Villa del Ava, it is a long free flowing promenade. So when you look at the plan at this level, the whole space is one. Unlike the earlier modernist houses where it was the living space that was the free flowing space. It was mostly the living space and its surrounding spaces, the lounge, the kitchenette, etc. That was one free flowing volume, but the other spaces were encased, or they were more hidden behind. But here the whole house is like a long free flowing promenade. These are some of the section, the elevation, the plans, and so this elongated open glazed living area running through the length of the house, very close to the idea of free flowing interiors of modernism, but instead of one concentrated open living room, this linear promenade is there, which is making it more complex, thus neo-modernism. The material contrast in the house is heavy opaque concrete on one side versus a very light and transparent glass, steel and glass on the other side of the house. So this is heavy opaque concrete on this side versus steel and glass on the other side. The structural expression is that the upper box seems to float above the glass base here, and this is the pool at the top floor. It has a minimal footprint, the glass base is visually porous, the building feels lighter and more integrated with the garden. Koolhaas's signature is that the house is able to anticipate Koolhaas's later projects, in which we see his fascination of juxtaposing contrasting volumes, floating elements radical transparency. So in lecture 52 in iconic houses, I had stated this point. I had said that when we come to, for example, examples like the Schrader house or Maison du Verre or the Glass house, they are as labs for architectural ideas. This house served as a lab for Rem Koolhaas in his later projects like these ones. You find that the dynamism and the kind of contrasting volumes, etc., what he was able to bring in the Seattle Library 2004, Casa di Musica in Porto in 2005, the Dutch Embassy in Berlin 2003, McCormick Tribune Campus Center in Chicago in 2003, we find this juxtaposing, contrasting volumes, floating elements, radical transparency in his projects, in his later projects. So we also have a panoramic framing. Koolhaas frames Paris within the architecture of his house, and the house becomes both a shelter and also an observation point from where you can observe the city. We will close here and we will continue to the final study on places to live in our next presentation. Thank you.